One thing that a lot of people don't realize is that your makeup tools can make or break your makeup look. Hello my loves, my name is Jasmine and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking all things makeup tools. So I gathered together a bunch of brushes here. I tried to grab my most affordable brushes because I know if you're a beginner, you don't want to break the bank. So of course I will link every single brush that I used in the description so you can buy it, as well as all the products that I used on my face, because we didn't really talk products that much, but we did go heavily in depth with the brushes. Now let's get into the video. Let me show you what makeup tools to use for each step of your makeup. Okay, so when it comes to brushes, there are 3 brands that I highly recommend if you're looking for affordable brushes, because I believe as a beginner you shouldn't be breaking the bank on anything when it comes to makeup, brushes, whatever. So the 3 brands that I recommend are Real Techniques, Morphe, and e.l.f. And I have brushes from all 3 brands here. Most of them are from Real Techniques because I just love Real Techniques. But I also highly recommend Morphe and e.l.f. Morphe is definitely the most expensive, but not nearly as expensive as some of these other brands. I already did fill in my brows, but I have not carved them out yet. To carve out my brows with my concealer, I like to use a flat brush like this. This is like an eyeshadow brush or a concealer brush. This is an old one from Morphe, but you can get one from any of the 3 brands that I mentioned. And this type of brush is the best for carving out your brows. I love how nicely it gets under the arch of my brow. I feel like it's just the perfect shape. And you can also use the edge of the brush along this side of your brow as well. I feel like this is also really easy to do with this type of brush. You don't want your brush that you use for your brows to be too big, because it makes it easier to make mistakes if the brush is too big. There go the cicadas, child. I hope y'all don't hear them. Hopefully I can edit them out. And then I do like to use a fluffier concealer brush. This is the Real Techniques Small Conceal Brush. And a brush that is still small but a little bit fluffier is really nice for blending out precise concealer application, like around the brows. And I think blending around them is important so that they don't have a halo around them when you do the rest of your makeup. For spot concealing any blemishes like dark spots or any acne, I like to use honestly this one of the same brushes that I used for my eyebrows, because I think this allows for really precise application. I'm going to use the flat brush. You don't want to use a concealer brush that is too fluffy when concealing any dark spots or anything, because that will shear the product out, which you don't want. You want it to remain highly pigmented when covering things like dark spots, which if you're a black or a brown girl, I'm sure you might have if you have acne. Now to blend out any color corrector you might have applied to your face, I like to blend this out the same way that I blend out concealer, so I'm going to use a concealer brush. Unfortunately, I forgot to buy another affordable brush for my color correcting. I do have an affordable concealer brush, but I want to use it for my actual concealer. So I'm going to use my Sephora Collection 71 brush. And I love this one, especially under the eye. I think it allows for a really nice blend of your color corrector. It blends it out very evenly and it distributes the product so well, because with color corrector you don't want to add too much product, but you want it to go a long way to cover up your hyperpigmentation. So this type of brush is perfect for that. Okay, gotta tuck the braids back for this. Next is foundation. So foundation brushes are so personal to each person because everybody has a different size and shape of face, so sometimes different foundations are best. Some people like foundation brushes that are a little bit fluffier, like this Morphe and Ariel one, and some people like ones that are a little bit more dense, like this Real Techniques one. I like to use fluffier brushes like this for foundations that are more light to medium coverage and also like skin tints. And then I like to use more dense brushes for more full coverage foundations. Again, it's up to personal preference, trial and error, but I don't think you can go wrong at all with this Real Techniques brush. So first I'm going to apply my foundation to the back of my hand. I like to warm it up with my fingers and then apply it directly to my face with my fingers. If you also have a flat foundation brush, you can also use that to do this step as well, but if you don't want to buy an extra brush, your fingers work just fine. And then like I said, I'm using this Real Techniques Expert Face Brush. This is the RT200 brush, and I'm going to use this to blend in my foundation. I think this brush distributes foundation really nicely, and having a good brush makes a world of a difference, because if you don't have the right brush, it can actually affect how the product shows up on your face and also how much product you use. When you're using your foundation brush, you don't want to swipe. You want to make sure you're tapping it into the skin. A lot of people say they don't like to use brushes because of streaks. If there's streaks, it could be one of two things. It's either a bad quality brush or you're using it incorrectly. Make sure you're tapping your foundation in, not swiping. And I'm probably going to repeat that throughout this whole video because it is extremely important. I think if your face shape is similar to mine, you'll like this foundation brush. I think it gets into every single area of my face pretty well. I have a pretty low hairline, so I think it gets into that little area really nicely. Now, I know a lot of beginners like to do their concealer first. I always tell everyone, whether you're a beginner or not, to do your cream bronzer / contour and cream blush before your concealer. I think it allows for a much easier blend. So I'm gonna do my cream bronzer. This is the Milk Makeup bronzer. The brush that you use to blend in your cream bronzer, your cream contour, should be dense. And I think having more of a flat end like this and a little bit more of a narrow shape really helps to hug the cheekbone. I think it allows for a really precise blend so that you're not blending this product all over your face like foundation, and it allows you to have that kind of sculpted look. Again, like I said, make sure you're tapping and not swiping. You see how that kind of just shaped my cheek? It just kind of made it look so sharp and precise. Not sharp because I don't have sharp cheekbones, but it really helped to define it and make it look a little bit more chiseled compared to this side where I haven't blended it yet. Same goes for your forehead. You want to make sure you're tapping it in, and I like to blend towards the center of my forehead because I know that we're going to add concealer to the middle. You want there to be as little harsh lines as possible when you're blending. Next, we're going to use our liquid / cream blush. I know liquid and cream blushes are a little bit different, but the application is pretty much the same. So when applying my liquid blush, I want to make sure I'm wiping the excess off so that I'm not applying too much blush at once. And then I'm going to apply it directly to my cheekbone. I think the best type of brush to use to blend out your liquid blush is more of a tapered brush. So this one is slightly flat. The bristles are tapered, meaning some of them are shorter, some of them are longer. Again, this one is from Real Techniques. And then again, like I keep saying, lightly tap. And you see how it's just diffusing on its own? I love using brushes for this so that it doesn't take away from the pigment. That's one thing I hate about beauty sponges, is that it almost picks up most of the product. As you can see, I could use some more blush, so I'm gonna put on a little bit more. For me, I like my blush to be all over my cheekbone, so on the apple and towards my temple, so that's why I'm blending it all over. But if you want it to remain in one area of your face, only blend it in that general area. So as you can see, I'm going up and down my cheekbone using tapping motions. You also want to make sure you blend it towards your bronzer as well, so that those are evenly blended in together and there's no harsh lines in between them. Another thing I always like to do with my brushes is go back in and blend again. So I already applied my cream bronzer, as you guys saw, but I'm going back in with the same brush just to reinforce that blend, and again, make sure there's no harsh lines in my makeup. Okay, so this is how I placed and applied my concealer. Depending on your concealer application, you're gonna need 2 different concealer brushes. Again, both of these are by Real Techniques. This is technically their setting brush, but I honestly really like this one for concealer as well. Again, a concealer brush is something that is really personal to you. This one is a little bit large and fluffy and tapered, and this one I believe is called a cat paw shape. As you can see, it has this really unique shape to it, so it's like kind of flat but also really tapered. So there's really short bristles at the front and then they get long in the back. This is the Real Techniques 402 brush. I'm going to use this to blend out my darker concealer shade. I think brushes like this are really good for concealer because of how fluffy they are. I actually really like fluffier concealer brushes rather than dense ones because I think using them with a light hand makes it really quick and easy to blend out your concealer. You see how quickly I blended that darker shade out? And I think it really helps to diffuse the lines of your concealer along your blush as well. As you can see, there's not really any harsh lines from my concealer while using this brush. So when blending out your concealer, you want to use a really light hand to prevent any harsh lines from forming. That is one of the, if not the number one thing you want to avoid when doing your makeup using brushes, is creating streaks or harsh lines. Something else I forgot to say when I blended out the concealer under my eyes is that I like to blend along the edges of where I applied that concealer first before I'm moving closer to where I applied the rest of the concealer. I think again this also helps for having that really diffused and flawless look. I don't like to use the same brush for my brightening shade because I don't want them to mix together and create one shade. I do want there to kind of be like an ombre effect. So I'm gonna get this Cat Paw concealer brush and I'm gonna use this one again the same way along the edges of where I applied the lighter shade of concealer, just to diffuse those edges out first, and then I'm gonna move in closer. And you see how this brush just perfectly fits underneath my eye where I added the brightening shade. I believe this is called the brightening concealer brush. Yes, it is. So it's literally made for this. And then as you can see, it's not fully blended, so I'm gonna go back in with the first concealer brush we used and just tap out the edges, even along the sides of my nose as well. Make sure you're turning your head in whatever mirror you're looking into, whether that's a bigger mirror or a handheld mirror, so that you can see your makeup from all angles. Now for my pressed and loose powder, you can use a brush, but I honestly highly recommend getting these little powder puffs. This one I have is from Huda Beauty. I really love these little triangle velour puffs from Huda Beauty, but I also really love the ones from Amazon. Honestly, all my Amazon ones are dirty, so that's why I'm using this one today. So when you apply your pressed powder onto your powder puff, you want to just swirl it in. And then before applying your powder, make sure you look up into your mirror to see if any creases have formed in your concealer. If so, just use your brush to lightly blend those out. And then don't look down so you don't form the crease again. And then you're gonna get your powder puff and use that to apply the powder to your under eye. Make sure you're getting as close to the lash line as possible. Looking up into my mirror to blend out any creases that might have formed. Adding my powder puff without looking down. And then going straight in. I like to apply the powder everywhere that I applied my concealer. So for me, that's why I kind of took it all the way out here, because I did apply or blend out my concealer this way. And then honestly, I like to tap over my nose. I don't add too much extra product or anything, but I do tap over my nose. And then, like I said, I'm applying the pressed powder everywhere that I applied my concealer. So upper lip, chin, and the center of my forehead. And don't worry if it looks a little bit harsh now, because I know y'all are thinking, Jasmine, you have so many harsh lines on your face, but don't worry. Now for the powder on the rest of my face, I'm going to use a powder that is the same shade as my skin tone. And then honestly, I like to use pretty dense powder brushes like this one. This one can also be used as a foundation brush. It's kind of up to your preference, like I said before. I'm going to use this shade for my powder on the rest of my face, like I said. So I'm going to dip into my pressed powder, and then like everything else, I'm going to tap this into my skin. I'm not really worried about covering up my cream blush and cream bronzer because we're going to reinforce that with our powder blush and powder bronzer, but I'm also going to take it up along the edges of where we applied the lighter pressed powder under our eyes. You see how that harsh line is kind of disappearing now? That's because we have a nice blend between both shades of powder. And as you can see, it did cover up the liquid blush, the cream bronzer, but not completely. And then depending on your skin type, you can decide how heavy to go with this. I have oily skin, so I am going in with a good amount of powder. And you can use a heavier hand with this. You don't want to have too light of a hand. I feel like people never say this, but if you put foundation on your neck, you need to powder your neck as well. And then I'm going over my nose with this one as well, just making sure to avoid directly under my eyes. So as you can see, everything looks a lot more smooth now. There's not as many harsh lines. Now I'm going to apply my loose powder. I'm going to say use a powder puff again. I'm using the same one that I used to apply my pressed powder. In my opinion, it doesn't really matter, but if you want to get out a different one, you definitely can do that too. So this is very, very important when applying your loose powder. When you press it in, do not just directly apply it onto your eye when the powder still looks like this on the powder puff, because it's very chunky. It's not going to allow for a smooth application. So you can go in the palm of your hand, the back of your hand, whatever you prefer, and just smooth it out so that the powder is evenly distributed onto the powder puff, and then you can go in and apply. Since I am baking today, I'm applying a little bit extra powder than someone who isn't baking would use, but you still want to make sure it is smooth. And then if you're not baking, you want to use far less powder than this so that you can just tap it into your skin. But I'm applying this and I'm making sure to diffuse the edges with the edge of my powder puff that doesn't have any excess powder on it, again, so no harsh lines are formed. I am kind of reverse contouring my nose as well. I know a lot of people like to do their nose contour before they bake, but for me, I like doing the powder first because it kind of gives you a guideline of where your contour should be so that you don't really have to clean it up. I'm also going to bake down the center of my nose for a highlight moment, and my upper lip and smile lines as well so that those don't crease. You're gonna let this sit for a couple minutes and then we'll blend it out. Okay, now it's time to blend out the bake. I'm gonna start by using my powder puff that I used to apply it to press it into my skin first, just to get as much of the powder into my skin as possible. Not all of it is going to press in, and that's fine because we applied an excess amount of powder. So after I press it in a little bit, I'm gonna get a setting brush. This is the Real Techniques 402 brush, the same one that we used for our concealer. And I'm gonna use this just to wipe away any excess powder and kind of blend it into the skin, again, to get rid of those harsh lines. I also like to use this one on the center of my nose. And I'm going to use this along the lines that I did my reverse contour and just blend it in. Again, you see how smooth everything looks now? Also, just to clarify, this is not the brush I used to blend out my concealer. It's just the same type. I have two of them, just to clarify. Okay, now we're gonna go in with our powder bronzer, and I love, love, love to use angled brushes like this one. This one is from e.l.f. and this is their angled blush brush, but I like using this one for bronzer. So this type of brush is really fluffy, but also has an angle that allows for precision. So I'm gonna dip into my powder bronzer, tapping off any excess, and then I'm going to use the angled side to kind of hug my cheekbone. And you see how precisely that's applying? With powders, I know I told y'all not to swipe, but that is when your face still has creams and liquids on it. When your face is set, you do want to have more of a tapping motion, but you can get away with swiping a little bit more because your face is set. It's not going to disturb any creams or liquids. I do like to turn it long ways as well, just to make sure that it's blending upwards into my cheekbone rather than dragging my face down. And then when I want more of a precise application, I turn it horizontal. You see the difference in my cheekbones? I personally don't love using huge powder bronzer brushes because it doesn't allow for precise enough of an application, and then it can quickly look muddy. And then also you want to get as close to your hairline as possible so there's not a weird halo. I didn't say this in the beginning, but whenever you're applying product close to your hairline, honestly, go in. And then I also just tap around my forehead as well. And then I'm gonna do a little bit on my jawline. To contour my nose, I do like to use my powder bronzer, and I like to use a brush that looks like this. This is an eyeshadow brush. This is for like the crease, but I find using a brush like this one is really nice for contouring your nose. You only want to use literally like the smallest amount of product. I only tapped in twice, and I'm still going to tap off the excess because it's really easy to get a muddy nose contour if you use too much product. So I'm going to start at the bottom of my nose and then use a super, super light hand along the sides of my nose. When you're doing your nose contour, you want to use a very, very light hand and a fluffy brush. I find a brush that is too precise will make your nose contour too sharp, and you want this to look very, very even and blended. I personally like to fill in my nostrils. I know not everybody does this, but I like to. And then blend up towards the brow bone. For your powder blush, you can use an angled blush brush like this one from e.l.f. But I personally prefer more of a fluffy tapered brush. Kind of like this one from Morphe X Ariel. They also have this one. These ones don't indicate what these brushes are for, but I'm just telling you what I personally would use them for, and I think either of these would be really nice for blush. I think if you want more of a precise application, you can use one like this, whereas this one is more dome shaped, still tapered and fluffy, but it just has a different shape. I'm going to tap into my powder blush, making sure not to pick up too much, and then applying that to the cheekbone. You see how it just immediately looks super diffused? It doesn't create a harsh line immediately. And with blush, you'd want to apply a little bit at a time. So once you apply a little bit, try to use the brush to distribute the product onto your cheek before you add any more. And then again, remember where you want your blush to be placed. I like it to be placed all along my cheekbone, mostly focused on the temple, but then I do kind of blend the excess down towards the apple of my cheek. And then I like to use my blush brush to kind of swipe a little bit under my eye. I think this really allows your blush and your under eye to be blended really nicely. I'm not going to apply any extra product when I do this because we don't want our under eye to be red or pink or whatever color blush we're applying, but we do want it to be really nicely blended so that there's not that harsh line there between our blush and our under eye. You see the difference between the two? This side looks a lot more blended, and this is a step that I see a lot of people skip or not know to do, but this really makes my makeup look more airbrushed and flawless. And then if you feel like it's not really blending, you can add a tad bit more blush, but make sure you apply it to your cheek and then drag towards your under eye. You don't want to apply any blush directly to your under eye. Okay, now for powder highlight. I know not everybody does this step, but for those of you that do like to use powder highlighter, I highly recommend a super fluffy, light brush like this. It almost is like flimsy because of how fluffy it is. You don't want something that's super dense because you want highlight to look very evenly distributed on the face. You don't want it to be super precise because that's what gives you that like 2016 like highlighter streak look. So I'm going to use this one from Morphe and Ariel, and I'm going to dip into my powder highlighter, making sure not to have too much on the brush at once, and then I'm just going to sweep it onto the cheek. You don't need to apply too much of this, and it really should only take a few seconds, as you saw. I like to go back in with my blush brush and just blend over this in case I think it is still too harsh. You can decide if you want your highlighter closer to the temple. Kind of like my blush, I like to apply it pretty evenly on my cheek. And then for my nose highlight, I'm using a teeny tiny little almost eyeliner smudger brush. And then for my nose highlighter, this is another brush from a Morphe collection. I'm pretty sure this one's discontinued. It's just a little eyeshadow brush like this, and I'm gonna use this to apply my nose highlight because I do like my nose highlighter to be a little bit more precise. I don't want it to look too diffused because this can honestly change the shape of your nose if it's not applied correctly. Also like to apply down the bridge of my nose, emphasizing it at the top, and then I'm just going to use my finger to diffuse that out. Kind of that like exclamation point type of shape. And that's really it, guys. Every single other step of my makeup, I'm just going to use directly the product, like lip liner, lipstick, lip gloss. Brushes are not needed. If you guys want me to make an eyeshadow tutorial video, I can definitely do that because there's a whole other set of brushes you need to do your eyeshadow that I didn't include in this video. And I can make a whole separate video about that. But I'll come back when I'm done with my makeup. Okay, here is my completed makeup look. As I said, everything that's on my face will be linked below. Don't worry, I won't leave you hanging. I will say, because everyone always asks about glitter on my eyes whenever I wear it, this is Urban Decay Space Cowboy. How stunning. I'm obsessed. To my beginners, to my non-beginners, I really hope that this video was helpful for you and that you have a little bit better of an idea of what brushes to use when doing your makeup. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'm always happy to answer your questions. Please make sure to give this video a like. It really helps me out. And of course, leave a comment of your thoughts or any questions you might have. Also, make sure you subscribe to my channel and turn on the post notification bell so you don't miss another video from me. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!